"Pick whichever lady suits you," the lawman declared, right up to the moment those tiny identical sisters whispered, "Father, she's the one." The atmosphere was thick with warmth and condemnation. At the heart of the parched village plaza, 3 females were secured to timber stakes, their limbs fastened at the rear, visages marked by perspiration and grime. Their locks were disheveled, mouths parched. No formal hearing had occurred, just murmurs, claims of impropriety, of undermining the ethical foundation, terms hurled like rocks, and nobody had risen to shield them. The assembly formed as though for a festival, chuckles blended with sneers, whispers with ridicule. Parents shielded their kids' sight, yet not their hearing. Lads tossed stones near the feet of the restrained ladies. One female wept. Another gazed at the soil. Solely one maintained her head elevated, raven-tressed, countenance injured, gaze firm as steel. Her identity was Eliza Thorne. On the fringe of the group lingered a fellow in a faded cap and grit-laden jacket. He was sturdy-framed, his whiskers neat, his stare slate like a peak tempest. Jacob Harlan had reached the frontier merely several moons earlier, recognized solely for the steeds he raised, and the pair of young daughters who always stayed close. They were 6 summers old, April and Rose, doubles, honey-stranded and shoeless. They gripped his trousers, glancing from beneath his extended overcoat. Nobody understood their origins. Nobody ventured to inquire. They named him Daddy, and that sufficed. The lawman showed up tardy as usual, atop a midnight stallion, too elegant for a figure like him. Lawman Harlan, a figure who brandished authority like a blade and grinned with lips that never touched his gaze. He trotted leisurely amid the throng, relishing the focus. He halted his mount next to the trio of females and peered downward, sneering. The lawman's gaze swept the assembly until it located Jacob. "Well, look here," he shouted, tone smooth with disdain. "See who emerged to observe the spectacle?" Jacob offered no reply. His palms rested upon the shoulders of the 2 youngsters. "You're an independent fellow, Harlan," the lawman went on, motioning toward the trio of secured females. "You're esteemed. As much as that counts in this pit. Why not select a spouse this day? You've got 2 young daughters requiring upbringing. Best they witness a female at your hearth once more." He waved a limb toward the stakes like a merchant presenting ripe produce. "Select whichever lady suits you, Jacob. Claim one for your own. Label it union. Label it compassion." The assembly burst into mirth. A handful of females averted their faces in embarrassment. Others observed, mute, stares empty. Jacob uttered nothing. He remained planted, his mandible tight. April pulled at his jacket. Rose stretched upward on her digits. "Father," April murmured, indicating with her tiny palm. "She's the one." Jacob traced her digit. Eliza Thorne. Her visage was puffed, yet her gaze shone vivid. She had remained silent throughout the dawn. Not when they fastened her limbs. Not when the throng mocked. But presently she regarded Jacob with an air akin to challenge or perhaps incredulity. "She's the one," Rose repeated, her tone gentle but certain. A quiet descended. The amusement faded. Jacob advanced, one shoe then the next, grinding in the hush. He refrained from speaking, avoided glancing at the lawman. He proceeded directly to Eliza. She recoiled merely once. When he delved into his jacket, then the knife gleamed. With a single rapid action, Jacob severed the cord constraining her arms. The fiber dropped, and Eliza inhaled sharply, massaging her wounded palms. Yet still she voiced nothing. Lawman Harlan remained rigid on his seat, his sneer vanished. The villagers gazed from Jacob to Eliza and rearward as if anticipating somebody to proclaim it a prank. Nobody did. Jacob removed his jacket and placed it across Eliza's shoulders. Then he pivoted to the youngsters and extended his palm. "Let's go," he stated. They dashed to him, encircling their limbs around his legs. Jacob glanced once more at Eliza. She affirmed with a nod. They departed, the quartet, abandoning the plaza mute in their wake. Jacob avoided glancing rearward. "If I have to decide," he pondered, "between a female the society deems culpable and a figure who conceals behind an emblem, I select the gaze that refuses to avert." The journey to Jacob's farm consumed almost an entire daylight. They voyaged in quietude, the daylight pursuing them like a vigilant specter. Eliza mounted one of his fillies, her arms still sore under the cuffs of his jacket. He refrained from talking, and she avoided questioning. The youngsters rode alongside Jacob, one ahead of him, the other grasping his rear. They giggled once when a hare scampered over the path, but otherwise they likewise were silent, observing Eliza in the dimming glow as if she represented something holy and almost vanished. When they reached, the terrain extended broad and exposed, a humble timber dwelling nestled beside a row of aspens, barriers scarcely maintaining form against the breeze. Jacob alighted initially. He hoisted the youngsters downward, then proffered his palm to Eliza. She accepted it. Within, he directed her to a tiny rear chamber, the one with a solitary cot and a pane that oriented eastward. He mentioned nothing regarding her duration of residence. No agreement existed, no stipulation. She lingered in the entrance while he positioned a dish of flatbread, legumes, and a portion of preserved pear on a bench outside her portal. He avoided rapping. The subsequent morn, Eliza awoke to the noise of fowl and a youngster's chuckle. She unlatched the portal to discover a duo of diminutive shoes adjacent to the barrier, soiled and tattered. April and Rose perched cross-limbed in the courtyard, weaving reeds and sharing confidences. One glanced upward, beamed, and tapped the ground next to her. Eliza emerged gradually, her uncovered feet grazing the ground. She voiced nothing. They refrained from inquiring. Later that daylight, she observed the smaller youngster hobbling mildly. When she bent to examine, she discovered a detached base, frayed. She carried the shoe indoors and perched by the blaze. Her digits quivered as she strung the thread, but each seam was precise, uniform. She completed both duos by twilight. Jacob observed her from the cooking area entrance, limbs crossed. He avoided expressing gratitude. That evening, he placed another dish by her portal again without rapping. As he rotated to depart, he halted. "I lack understanding of why they identified you," he stated softly. "But I rely on the intuitions of youths more than the verdicts of adults." Eliza regarded the dish, then upward at him. She affirmed once. In the days that ensued, the dwelling established a pattern. Jacob arose prior to daybreak, labored the barriers, nourished the steeds. The youngsters assisted in collecting over, brushed the ground, and fetched liquid from the spring. Eliza spoke little, but when she did, it was solely to the youngster's mild inflections, tender adjustments, the sort of tone that mended rather than directed. She never addressed Jacob by title. One dusk, as the gust wailed through the aspens, Eliza perched on the veranda steps, observing the skyline blaze crimson. Within, the youngsters slumbered coiled next to each other like two kernels in a husk. Jacob lingered behind her, reclining against the frame. He refrained from speaking. She avoided turning, but in her thoughts, the tone that had long fallen mute, murmured. "I was hauled from my abode amid the darkness, labeled a slayer, scorned by those who formerly greeted me in the bazaar, rocks flung for quietude, shackles for dignity. But nobody, not a single time, regarded me the way those youngsters did, as if I embodied something virtuous." She shut her lids against the gust, and for the initial instance in ages, Eliza Thorne inhaled without dread. The gust wailed through the aspens that evening, chillier than it ought to have been for early summer. It descended from the peaks with the harshness of cold season, declining to perish, shaking the blinds and creeping below the fissures in the planks. Jacob awoke before the blaze had weakened, his senses drawing him from repose. He perceived them initially, gentle sobs, scarcely louder than the gust. When he accessed the youngster's chamber, the odor of illness struck him like vapor from a waning fire. April and Rose reclined twisted in their coverings, faces reddened, brows scorching. Their flesh was heated to contact. Rose kicked feebly against the fabric, her mouths dry. "Too frigid, the frost too frigid," she murmured. April groaned, grasping the covering firmer. "She's chanting. Don't cease. Odors like vapor." Jacob acted swiftly. He kindled the blaze, brought liquid to a simmer, ripped material into bands for chill wraps. He operated in quietude, mandible firm. But the youngsters continued uttering, mumbling through their illness, as if ensnared in a vision far ancient than their ages. She embraced us. "Don't release her." At the corridor's termination, a silhouette shifted. Eliza lingered shoeless, her sleep gown dangling free, her gaze broad and locked on the cot. She voiced nothing initially, then gently, "What did they utter?" Jacob looked upward, damp fabrics in his palms. Something regarding frost, chanting, vapor. Eliza's inhalation snagged, her digits coiled firmly against the frame.
Cover, she stated, scarcely a murmur.
The cover. She advanced gradually, each stride tentative. The youngsters persisted in agitating terms cascading out like phantoms. She embraced us. She was cozy. Eliza descended to her joints beside the cot. Her palm quivered as she extended, then halted inches from April's face. I recall them, she stated. There was a blizzard, a glade. They were isolated, clustered. Beneath a shrub, I enveloped them in the sole cover I possessed. I clutched them through the darkness. I chanted to prevent us all from fading beneath. She shut her lids, tone quivering now. I attempted to transport them, but I stumbled. I struck my skull. All after that is haze. I awoke in a hut days afterward, hemorrhaging solitary. I believed they had perished. Jacob lingered mute at the entrance. Eliza regarded the youngsters, then positioned a palm tenderly on Rose's scorching brow. They endured, she murmured. That evening, Eliza remained by their flank. She cleansed their visages, altered their fabrics, ladled soup between their mouths. She droned the identical tune from the woodland, the lyricless melody she had once murmured into the icy obscurity. Jacob perched by the blaze, concealed but attentive. He avoided disrupting. He merely observed the glimmer of illumination on her visage and the manner the youngsters calmed beneath her tone. In his thoughts, he wandered back to that harsh, cold season. He had been traveling after an escaped filly near the upper crest when he noticed something odd, a trail of shadowy marks extending across the frost. Hemorrhage partially concealed by fresh descent. He pursued it to a shattered shelter, hardly upright. Within, 2 young girls, no more than 5, reclined coiled together in a mass of fleece. They were scarcely inhaling. Nobody else, no titles, no hints. He transported them to his abode. They named me Daddy by the 4th day, he murmured, and I never possessed the courage to inform them differently. Eliza immersed another fabric, her actions tender. She looked upward but avoided meeting his gaze. I am not their parent, she stated, but that darkness I elected to become. Jacob emerged outdoors into the chill evening atmosphere. He proceeded to the timber stack next to the shed and selected a fragment of fir. Perching on the rim of the basin, he extracted his small blade and commenced shaping. Gradual, consistent cuts. By dawn, the illness had subsided. The youngsters slumbered tranquilly, faces reddened but no longer scorching. Eliza perched, slumped in the seat, still attired from the evening. The cover he had provided enveloped around her shoulders. Jacob approached and placed something on the surface beside her, a tiny polished chunk of timber, the shaping still recent. It stated, "Occasionally a bode is a recollection you overlooked you constructed." He regarded her one additional time at the youngsters resting soundly next to her. She's not an outsider, he pondered. She's the cause they're still breathing. The rumors started like mist, slender, innocuous, floating, and then ignited. By week's conclusion, the entire village was humming with discussion. They murmured it in the tavern over liquor, at the supply depot, amid bags of seed, on verandas and benches, and behind the spines of anyone who might heed. They claim he fetched her to his place. She rests under his shelter. And the youngsters, what sort of model is that? She's slain her spouse. Remember that. The village divided like arid timber. Some recollected what Jacob had accomplished, how he had rescued those youngsters, how he maintained solitude and settled his obligations. They affirmed quietly when his title was uttered, reluctant to denounce. But others, noisier, more poisonous, viewed him now as something sullied. Resting with a slayer, they stated. What type of fellow brings home dirt like that? It required little time for Lawman Harlan to grasp the opportunity. On the ensuing Sabbath, just after the chapel chimes sounded, he summoned a village gathering in the plaza. Folks assembled eager for display, for something upright to rely on. Lawman Harlan perched nearby with his digits hooked through his strap, beaming. "Another village gathering, Mr. Harlan?" he drawled. "You have a liking for theater, or are you merely aiming to be leader?" Jacob refrained from responding. Not yet. Then the assembly separated. A shape appeared. Dusty, slender, journey-fatigued but recognizable. His jacket was mended at the joints, and a mark ran below his chin like a twisted stream. Eliza inhaled abruptly. "Samuel." Her sibling advanced gradually toward them, gaze never departing Harlan's visage. "I've returned," he stated, his tone conveyed, deep, rough but definite, and I've brought what ought to have arrived with me long ago. He elevated a pouch, aged hide drawn firm with a band. From it he extracted a faded packet, creased documents, and a damaged wax tube, the type utilized to capture sound on ancient recorders. This, he stated, elevating the tube, was captured the evening Daniel Thorne perished, the evening lawman Harlan fired him in the rear. Inhalations rippled through the assembly like breeze through grain. Harlan's beam diminished. This is insanity. He's been absent 12 years. What does he comprehend? Samuel avoided recoiling. I fled because you warned to slay me if I talked, but I never discarded this. And I discovered the financial records too. Evidence you falsified Daniel's signature to shift ownership of his terrain directly into your own possession. A quietude descended weighty and quivering. Jacob advanced. Activated, he stated. Samuel affirmed. A assistant retrieved the ancient recorder. As the device snapped and engaged to existence, the assembly inclined in. Then emerged the tone. Dim, scratchy, but indisputable. You believe you're superior to me, Daniel? Believe just because you don an emblem and possess a lovely spouse, you can cause me to vanish. She ought to have been mine. You both seized what I merited, so now I'll seize it back. The noise of a scuffle. A firearm discharge, yells. The capture ended. Nobody inhaled. Eliza's joints weakened mildly, but Jacob grasped her. Lawman Harlan retreated a pace. That demonstrates nothing, he snapped. It's rumor. Aged deceptions and altered noises. Another tone interrupted him. We compared the script, Lawman, stated an attorney from Billings who'd arrived with Samuel. The falsified titles, the pilfered funds, and now this. Harlan extended for his pistol, but 4 assistants already had theirs aimed. Don't, one of them stated. Just don't. They bound him right there before the folks who had once named him authority. Some sobbed, some observed in astonished quietude. Eliza averted her gaze, not from dread, but from the type of weariness only verity can deliver. As Harlan was escorted away, she pivoted to her sibling. He appeared elder, gentler, but the lad she once safeguarded was still there in the edges of his beam. Gratitude, she murmured. Samuel affirmed, gaze sparkling. Jacob positioned beside her, and for an extended instant, he merely regarded the assembly, this village that had questioned, censured, and now lingered remorseful. He avoided boasting, avoided elevating his tone. He just articulated the verity. I didn't rescue her, he stated softly. I was merely the sole one who didn't avert my gaze. And with that, he grasped her palm again publicly this time and guided her to their abode. The dawn after, the village became serene. No more cries, no more chattering mouths, just the twitter of avians and the groan of breeze across the shed covering. The sort of tranquility that solely succeeds tempests, and even then not for extended. Jacob arose before the daylight, nourished the steeds, inspected the barrier lines. He progressed through the actions like a fellow clutching something delicate in his torso. By the time the initial illumination struck the shed portals, he was shaping with his small blade, each cut gradual and cautious. Eliza discovered him there, hunched next to the stable, encircled by the natural aroma of straw and hide. He avoided turning when she entered, just continued chiseling. For an instant she observed him, digits resting lightly on the barrier. You've been out here since before daybreak, she stated gently. He affirmed once. Then, without regarding her, he arose and stepped aside, there on the rear of the shed portal, where every guest would perceive it, where the daylight captured it just right. He had etched it profound and proud. Jacob, Eliza, April, and Rose abode. Eliza winked. She contacted the characters with quivering digits. The indentation of her title next to his. Her tone was scarcely inhalation. You didn't inquire of me. I did, Jacob stated. I just avoided using terms. He pivoted to her then, cleaning wood shavings from his palms. I lack a band, he proceeded. Lack the chapel documents or the minister's approval yet, but I possess this terrain, and I possess you, and I possess them. He halted, the serenity between them, full of something sacred. I placed your title next to mine because that's where it fits. Not because anyone instructed me to, not because I was compelled, but because every time I contemplate the term abode, I envision your visage. Eliza avoided speaking. Her gaze filled, but not from the sort of grief she'd known previously. These were distinct droplets, ancient, weightier. She advanced toward him gradually, and then she affirmed. Once keen and certain, he approached nearer, but she elevated a palm tenderly to halt him. I'm not affirming yes because I'm enamored, she murmured. Not yet. I'm affirming yes because for the initial time in my existence, someone didn't view me as a load or a form or a tale already narrated. Her neck constricted. You didn't request me to justify myself. You didn't await evidence. I was sufficient. He regarded her, serene, attentive. You etched my title before I could even state it fitted there. Jacob's tone was deep. I didn't need to await. I just comprehended. Eliza's mouth quivered, then bent into the gentlest, tiniest beam. Behind them from the dwelling came the noise of small feet dashing bare and swift. April and Rose erupted into the shed. Disheveled, stranded, and out of breath, clutching a cluster of field blooms. Bound with string. We gathered them for Mother, Rose beamed. Eliza regarded the two youngsters, their daylight-kissed faces, their proud little palms. She descended to her joints and drew them both into her embrace, not sobbing from ache, but from something long postponed. Jacob observed them from the entrance, palm resting over the title he'd etched. He avoided uttering a term. He didn't require to. One cycle later, the terrain had mellowed. The grassland no longer sensed like a site of banishment. It sensed like abode, not because of what sprouted from it, but because of what had rooted within it. The Harlan farm wasn't vast, nor was it the most refined. The shed still tilted a bit in the gust, and the covering required repairing every alternate week. But there were fowl now, a sheep, an obstinate donkey named Oliver, and chuckles, sincere, unprotected chuckles that echoed through the dale like chapel chimes with no remorse. Eliza suspended washing on the cord, her gown waving like a secondary banner of liberty. Jacob was repairing a barrier with April perched on his shoulders, providing directions far louder than essential. Rose was at the veranda surface with her tongue between her dentition, sketching intensely with fragments of coal and fruit liquid. When the illustration was completed, she dashed shoeless to her parent, document fluttering in the wind. Eliza bent and accepted it. The outline was rough but potent, a female bending in frost, her limbs extended wide, protecting two small shapes with a cover. Above them, twisted lines of gust and constellations. A solitary term inscribed in square characters at the summit. Mother. Eliza's digits quivered mildly as she clutched the illustration. Her neck constricted. She regarded Rose. You recollect that? Rose affirmed. Sometimes I still envision the frost, but not the frigid portion. Just your tone. Eliza drew her into an embrace and clutched her firm. Jacob ascended the trail, April on his side, beaming. What's this? He inquired, regarding the document. Eliza presented it to him wordless. He examined it, beamed, then stated, so plainly and gently the breeze almost transported it away. They labeled you culpable, but they labeled you mother. Eliza encountered his gaze, and for an instant all the ages of dread and quietude appeared to cleanse away in the illumination between them. That dusk they perched together on the veranda. The blaze snapped within, the aroma of vapor curling from the flue and blending with flatbread and broth. The daylight sank low, projecting extended golden silhouettes over the meadows. April reclined against Jacob's torso, already partially slumbering. Rose perched coiled in Eliza's lap, droning a cradle song she didn't even comprehend she recollected. Nobody spoke. They didn't require to. The heavens above was immense, savage, and uncontrolled. But the four spirits below it were bound now, not by lineage, not by regulation, but by something far more ancient. A vow made in the frost, a title etched in timber, a kin born of blaze forged in tempest, and in the waning illumination of a terrain that had once solely known endurance, there was tranquility, and the aroma of embers. It no longer signified destruction. It signified abode. In a terrain where fairness was distorted and grace arrived gradual, a fellow heeded his offspring, not the throng. A female once damned became the core of a dwelling. And two tiny girls prompted a fractured village what affection truly resembled. They labeled her culpable, but they labeled her mother. If this tale touched you, press that like icon and join Western Tales. Here we narrate the sort of narratives that persist long after the grit clears. Tales of intense affection, serene atonement, and spirits that selected correct over simple. Journey with us. There's additional arriving.